Greiner Talks, about sustainability and transformation. A Greiner podcast episode.
Hello and welcome to the first episode of our new podcast series here at Greiner. My name is Alexander Bert. I'm part of the sustainability team at Greiner, and our topic today is, of course, sustainability. I'm here in Vienna with our very first guest, sustainability expert Fred Lux.
Hello.
Welcome to the show.
Nice to be here.
So, life is always about choices. Could I ask you as a start to make some simple or maybe not that simple choices?
Yes, please.
When traveling, do you prefer to go by train or car?
By train.
Vacation at home or abroad?
This year at home.
When shopping, going for vegetables or meat?
Vegetables. I don't eat meat.
Shopping online or in person?
Rather in person.
Writing emails or letters?
Well, for romantic reasons, I would prefer letters, but in reality, I write 99% emails and sometimes postcards for my wife.
Growth or degrowth?
It's complicated.
The past or the future?
I'm interested in the past because you can learn very much for the future.
And as a last one, change or change?
Change.
I'm glad that's your answer, because this podcast today is all about change. It is about the biggest challenges that we are facing as a plastics producing company, as society, as individuals. And that's why I'm excited to be meeting you today and to learn your input as a sustainability expert, as an economist, as a publicist. So let me briefly introduce you. Fred, you have co-founded and managed the Competence Center of Sustainability at the Vienna University of Economics and Business. You were the head of corporate sustainability at a large Austrian bank. And these days, you are a researcher, writer, and speaker. So I think it's safe to say that you're an expert on sustainable transformations. But what is sustainability for you?
In a nutshell, sustainability to me means the balance between ecological, economic, and social goals. And that's quite a good definition, I think. At the same time, one problem of sustainability, as you probably know, is that today everybody wants sustainability. And the reason for that is that everybody interprets sustainability in a certain manner. And that makes it really complicated. And there's, of course, the mother of all definitions of sustainability from the Brundtland Report, 1987. Sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And I think that that's also a very good definition. And the challenge, of course, is to bring it to the ground in a way, in a company, in a society, in science, in non-governmental organizations. But I think that this idea of a balance is good, for me at least, it's very good and convincing, because it shows that it's not sustainable to focus on only one dimension. And I think in the mainstream discourse, very often we only look at ecological issues, which are very, very important. But as soon as you forget the social dimension, or in a company, for example, the economic dimension, then you don't go very far with sustainability.
Mm-hmm. So it is very important for you to have that balance between ecological, economic, and social sustainability.
Yes.
Would you say that in your personal life you're fulfilling that kind of balance?
That has several answers to it. One is that personally I try to live in a sustainable life. For example, I don't eat meat and I don't have a car, and I use public transport. However, the question in the context of sustainability is whether it's possible to live sustainable in a non-sustainable system. I think that's really a very crucial question for sustainability, also for company level sustainability. And I think it's really important to avoid a privatization of sustainability and delegate the responsibility for sustainability to individuals. And I think it's much smarter on a societal level to politicize the issue, which means that having an awareness that sustainability is a task that can only be fulfilled on a societal level, and that you can contribute as a company and an individual, but it's also very crucial to have the right framework, so to speak, in which economic activities take place and consumption activities take place.
When I understand you correctly, you think it's the wrong approach to give that burden of being sustainable, so to say, or this obligation to an individual level.
Yes,
but
yes,
isn't it
very strongly?
Isn't it our obligation to live a sustainable life?
Yes, but I think it's very important to acknowledge that you can only be responsible for things that you can actually influence. So if I have a choice of eating meat or vegetables, I can really make that choice. So I'm responsible for that choice. But if I live, for example, I was born in a very rural area on a farm. So, and when you're 18 and you live there, you have a car as soon as possible, because otherwise you're lost, because there was no public transportation. So that indicates it's always important to see the system in which you're operating. And that's why I find, especially when my point would be, we live in a certain constellation that is at the moment very unsustainable, and the individual has a responsibility for his or her activities, but at the same time these activities are part of a larger societal context, and that is very important to acknowledge, I find.
Mm-hmm. You have been working in the sustainability industry for many years, so you have been permanently working on changing things for the better. In that context, are you an optimist? Are you a pessimist? How did that career influence your thinking?
Well, that career influenced my thinking in a lot of ways, especially when I moved from science to the very large bank here in Austria. And I'm a German coming to Austria. That was the first culture shock. But the culture shock moving from science to business was actually much larger. And what that job has taught me, that it is very easy sitting on a desk and writing great concepts of sustainability. And it's a different world if you're actually in a company and trying to really make change, as you say. And that is probably one learning. And I'm not an optimist and I'm not a pessimist. I have hope. I find it really a different perspective, because optimism as well as pessimism are very lazy attitudes, I find. Optimism says it's going out, it's becoming good anyway, and the pessimist says it's going bad anyway. So as a hopeful person, I think it might be complicated, but there is a chance of changing things, and that's my attitude, and that was certainly necessary for being a sustainability manager in a large company, or also at the WU at the University in Vienna. It was really also a precondition of working. And I think everybody who takes the responsibility for sustainability issues in a company knows that kind of context.
And hope is a perfect keyword for my next question or the next topic as well. Looking at the state of our world, humanity currently requires around 1.6 planets to meet its current demand for natural resources. And this number, 1.6, doesn't seem to be going down. So
no, it's going up very rapidly.
It's going up rapidly.
Yes.
So I'm wondering, are you hopeful? What is the way out? Can we reverse that kind of development?
No, I don't think you can reverse a development, but you can change the course of industrial societies. And I think it's also possible to have a model of wealth in the countries such as China or India or Indonesia that is less resource intensive. And the point is, I really don't like the sentence, there is no alternative. But when it comes to ecological issues, there's certainly no alternative to dramatically reducing the ecological footprint of humanity. And as for hope, it's certainly, to be very honest, it's hard to hope that this will have a good outcome, but it's not impossible. And in my latest book, it's about hope. There's one chapter on political miracles. And I learned that from an ecological economist, Herman Daly. He said there are not physical miracles, but there are political miracles. And to give one example, if I may.
Of course.
German unification. I was born in the 60s, and when I grew up, it was absolutely sure that there will be no unified Germany. even 1988, nobody would have thought it. In 1989, there was this peaceful revolution, and the miracle happened, and the map of Europe changed profoundly, and nobody would have thought that it would be possible. And the same today. Nobody thinks it's really possible to be on a sustainable planet. I think, well, let's work for it, and then let's see whether it works.
Mm-hmm. And given your last answer and knowing some of your publications, it is obvious that you're kind of critical to our current economic system, which is obviously based on growth. So I'm curious to know from you, is sustainable development and growth exclusive to each other?
Well, that requires a long answer maybe, but you can stop me if it's too long. First of all, it's interesting that you say that I'm critical of our current economic system, because the first association one has is probably that I'm kind of a Marxist or an anti-capitalist, and I'm not. I still believe that capitalism is a very flexible system, very resilient system. And as Josef Schumpeter once called it, it's a form of creative destruction. And I still believe that you can use this creativity that is in there, you can use that for sustainability issues. I mean, it's not sure, but my hope is still that capitalism can be changed, especially because I think history has proven that some simple ideas about alternative models sometimes have a very, very bad outcome. That is one part of the answer. The other is concerning growth, and this is really critical. Of course, up to now, economic growth is a central feature of capitalism, but I think we have to get used to the idea that economic growth can be very uneconomic. So, and it's basic economic logic. It's also from Herman Daly in the 90s. He has formulated this idea of uneconomic growth. When you have an activity in economics and the additional costs are larger than the additional benefits, then you stop the activity on a microeconomic level. And the idea is that also true on a macroeconomic level. And I think that is true. And it's of course very complicated, because as an individual I can stop my activities, but as a macroeconomic system you cannot stop a system, even though it's tried now in the context of the corona crisis. And my impression is that it's very important to look closely at this growth issue and being not naive, because on one hand I think green growth, like everybody wants green growth nowadays, I think that is a very naive position, because it focuses solely on technology. And it is quite clear that technology alone will not save the day. And on the other hand, post-growth, the alternative that says we have to stop immediately our economic growth, that is also naive, because as we can see in the corona crisis, it's very, very socially disruptive to stop to grow. So this is why I prefer the idea that we have to search for paths that are less growth dependent, I would say. Because at the end, what counts is not the figure of the gross domestic product, but the amount of energy and materials we use.
Mm-hmm. And you were mentioning the additional costs that might come with economic growth, or growth in whatever sense. Do we fully understand these additional costs that might occur?
I think it's dramatically complicated to translate the ecological burden we put on the environment into economic terms, which is money. At the same time, science, especially economic science, but also other sciences, have accumulated so much knowledge that we at least know the right direction. We know that we need less CO2. We know we have to protect biodiversity. We know that we have to use less resources. So it's not even necessary to really have a very kind of exact knowledge of the costs. It's much more important to have the big picture. And I think the big picture is very clear. And I like to quote often The Economist, the British news magazine, which is a very liberal and not at all green or some socialist publication. And since like 5 to 6 years, they started really to report very intensively about climate change. And they have a very strong position. They say the science is totally clear. We know what we have to do, at least in general. And I think when you look at, in Austria, the program of the current government, and when you look at the European Union, the Green Deal, I think the knowledge that the course has to be changed, the knowledge is there. And the hope is that the political will also is there.
Mm-hmm. One thing that is obvious from your answer, and one thing that I have observed for myself over the past few years, is that our world is increasingly complex. It seems very easy to blame the economy, to blame the industry, but whose fault is it really that we're exceeding planetary boundaries?
My very strong impression is that it is not sensible to put the blame on certain individuals, and I think it's very important to acknowledge the shared responsibility, so to speak, of consumers, of business, of the state, of civil society, of science. And society is a very, very complex thing, and capitalism is a very complex thing, or the market economy, if you prefer that word. And the challenge is that persons and institutions and firms try to change their ways there where they can change it. I mean, a few minutes ago, I said you have responsibility for what you can really change. And I cannot change the tax system in Austria. I can change how I travel from A to B. But there is my responsibility for my travel and my diet. But there's a responsibility of the state for a tax system, or there's a responsibility for Greiner to change its production system or to interact with the stakeholders. And it's a shared responsibility.
So no meaningful change unless we're all willing to do our part.
Well, I think a few people and institutions will have to be forced. I mean, that's perfectly okay in a democracy. And my impression is that one important point is, of course, this state of the world is also shaped by people that have privileges. And Harald Welze, which is a famous sustainability researcher, he said, you have to deprivilege people if you want to change the world. And I think that's really an important point, that it is naive to think that we will create a sustainable society and everybody wins. I mean, politicians like this win-win idea, which I like also. The problem is it is not always available. Sometimes, like when I'm a mechanic in a car industry and I produce combustion engines, then I have a problem, and my world will change maybe in a world that in a way that I won't like. But it's naive to not look at these costs that are also there.
Mm-hmm. And talking about that change that can be painful or that can change your way of living, how do you deal with that kind of change? How do you change people's mindsets? How do you convince people that we have to do this for the greater good?
I'm an economist, so I don't want to change people's attitude, but I want to change the incentives. And that's why a reform of the financial system, is the tax system especially, is very important. Ernst Ulrich von Weizsäcker, which is a German sustainability researcher, he said already in the 80s, the prices have to tell the ecological truth. And that is really a very, very crucial point, which is relevant for individuals because my consumption behavior depends on prices, for companies such as Greiner because investment decisions depend also on prices. And that's why I find that the state has a very strong responsibility to getting the prices right. And the good news is ever more governments seem to acknowledge that.
So in the end, the best steering tool, the most reliable steering tool is money?
Well, if you ask an economist, don't be surprised if he talks about money. So, well, money is one very important indicator because it's so general. You can use it for all kinds of stuff. But another very important factor, I think, is information. That people need to know about the problems of the world and about the ecological challenges we have. But yeah, still, prices and money is very important.
One of your books is titled Eco-Populism: How Simple Solutions, Ignorance and Terror of Opinion Threaten Our Future. That was a loose translation.
Yeah, very good.
Why do you think that simple solutions are a threat to our future?
Simple solutions are a threat to our future because they keep us from acknowledging the complexity of the world and create an illusion of simple path to the future. And populism, of course, political populism is by nature a movement that offers simple solutions. And after the things we have talked about, it's completely clear that sustainability will not be created by simple solutions because there are no simple solutions. And I find that one of the positive aspects of the dramatic crisis created by the coronavirus, that populism is completely empty. When there are really serious problems that have to be solved, we see that the people that offer these simple solutions, quote unquote, they have nothing to offer. And that's why I find it important that we acknowledge the complexity and the difficulties, and especially when you work in a company. And when I think about my time in the bank, of course, it's sometimes very frustrating, but it's much more productive to act even though you're frustrated, rather than looking for simple solutions, because, as I said, there are none.
So again, you're acknowledging the complexity of the world. And on your website, you're also writing that bullshit bingo, or kind of a rhetoric of concern or buzzwords, are threatening the idea of sustainable development. So basically, words without action. What is your perception? Are you talking about greenwashing here? Is greenwashing still fashionable? Is it still happening?
Talk is cheap, and greenwashing is also cheap. And my impression is that it worked for a while. But I'm not so critical of greenwashing as many other people. This might surprise you, but my feeling is that when a company starts to talk green and write sustainability reports where everything is fine and we're on the right path, and what you read in every sustainability report, it starts to create a certain perception within the company, but also with your stakeholders. And you can lie only so long. And when you start greenwashing, that might be in the start of serious sustainability activities. That's why I'm not so critical of greenwashing. Of course, when you try to keep greenwashing forever, then it's not good. But that is the second point. It becomes harder and harder for companies to lie about their sustainability or about their unsustainability. The consumers have become much more critical. Fridays for Future has created a complete different environment for debating climate sustainability issues. And after the worst of the corona crisis is over, this will return. I already sense when I talk to managers, it becomes more important. So the consumers are more critical. And also, last part of the answer, the regulators, the governments also know that they have to act in terms of sustainability. And this changes the environment for doing business and makes it very hard to be greenwashing.
That's a very exciting reflection for myself, from my perspective. Would you say that we are past the age of greenwashing? So companies have been doing it for quite a long time, and now they're being held accountable for their actions.
Yeah, that's a very good word. They're being held accountable. And there's one very fascinating area of the economy where this is taking place at a very high speed, which is sustainable finance. I mean, 15 years ago, nobody would have talked about banking, insurances, and sustainability. And now there's a sustainable finance agenda on the European level. There's sustainable finance within the Austrian energy strategy. All banks I know are really seriously to try to change their products, and not only their sustainability reports. There's really something going on the level of products, of services that are offered. And when you look at the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, which is my favorite newspaper, a rather conservative newspaper, in their economics section, there's virtually every day, there is a report about sustainable finance, about companies changing the ways, about ESG criteria, and so forth.
And I guess that kind of momentum also triggers lots of effects and makes the industry change somehow.
Yes, I mean, the challenge is really to keep this energy going and not lose sight of the challenge, especially in the context of the corona crisis. Many people sensed a risk that sustainability will disappear from the agenda, and it did. In April, May, June, it was not there. But now, September, and I'm sure with the rest of the year and next year, it will even be stronger, this return to the sustainability agenda. And next week, I will be talking at a Fridays for Future event for teachers, for example. And there are many events in the next months to come. And there are also many serious activities of companies that lead in the right direction.
So on the one hand, greenwashing might trigger certain effects to actually make changes in the industries. On the other hand, for consumers, it makes it very difficult to make the most sustainable choice or to choose the most sustainable product because you could be easily misled. Which developments do you see in that regard?
Two things are really important. One is that there's an inflation of sustainability labels, bio, regional, healthy, vegan, and people are really overwhelmed by this multitude of labels. And that makes it really hard. And of course, in a fantasy world, the best thing would be one label for everything where you can see the ecological and the social and the economic impact. That is one part of the answer. The other part is, again, the prices have to tell the ecological truth. We have a very ingenious indicator in our economy, which is money, the price of things. And if you have a system in which the prices are closer to the ecological truth, and that when you buy something from New Zealand, it's probably more expensive than you buy something from a Steiermark, then that's a strong signal also for the consumer. So I think when the prices tell the ecological truth, it makes it much more easy and reduces the complexity of choosing. Because as you say, today, if I want to make a really serious choice about sustainability, as soon as I'm in the supermarket, I'm totally overwhelmed and I don't have the time to do the research. Nobody has.
And no matter which choices we make, it is obvious that our choices have consequences. And that is something we're aware of at Greiner as well. That is why we put in place a new sustainability strategy called Blue Plan. One of the goals of this strategy is to become a fully circular business by 2030. And as you can imagine, that is quite a challenging goal. Every day we hear sentences like plastics is bad, plastics pollutes the environment, and so on. At the same time, plastics is everywhere in our lives, and often it is one of the most sustainable options. So the truth is not black or white. What's your take here?
My take is there is no black and white in sustainability. And I quoted a few minutes ago this populism of simple solutions. And when it comes to plastic, I'm not an expert, but again, it makes sense to look at the complexity of the issue. And as you say, sometimes plastic is a very sustainable solution, sometimes it's not. And being aware of this is important for the consumers, but also for your company. And what I like is that you obviously take this challenge very seriously. And I think sometimes it's important to be self-confident with your own product. I mean, if it's not sustainable, it should be criticized. However, if there are different choices, and if sometimes, and in many cases, I take it that plastic is the good choice, then you should be really confident about it. Because one problem is maybe that plastic is kind of a symbol for environmentally unfriendly products, which is not true in reality. And it has a very strong symbolic dimension, I think. And I'm sure you will work on that too, not only on the actual process, but also on how do you talk about sustainability in products and processes.
It is obvious that transforming a business is always a challenging task. You have to change existing structures, you have to challenge each other, you have to inspire each other to bring about change. In that context, I'm just wondering if you could give us one or two key learnings from your experience and your career as a sustainability expert.
Three things maybe. One is sometimes it's very good to be naive. When you're new in a company, it's easy to be naive. And when you try to mess things up and change things, naivete is sometimes a productive force. The second is there's a very famous quote by Peter Drucker, which I like very much. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. And that is very much true for sustainability issues. And when I was asked, when I was in a bank, it was 10 years ago, people asked me, what do you do as a sustainability manager in a bank? Nobody understood that. Today, everybody understands. But not then, back in the day, people couldn't relate. And I always said, I'm a cultural worker. I work on the culture. And that is certainly true for every company and even for public administration and politics and science. It's a matter of culture. And yeah, the third point would be it's very important to be sensitive with respect to what's going on in society, to have a feeling for what stakeholders think, what the NGOs think, what science produces, how political development change. The sensitivity towards the outer world, so to speak, is important for a successful sustainability strategy.
we are kind of approaching the end of today's podcast episode. It was exciting speaking to you, but I would like to ask you, are you up for a short round of word rap?
Yes, I am.
So I'll just shoot a few words at you and you reply with the first thing that comes to your mind.
Can it be more than one word?
It can be more than one
Okay.
word, definitely.
All right.
Water.
Necessary.
Forest.
Right around the corner of my house.
Diversity.
Very important for sustainable development.
7 billion people.
Very many people, but in the future there will be even more of us.
Your ecological footprint.
Too high, but I'm working on it.
Future.
Open.
Your message to the world.
There is hope.
Thank you so much for your answers, Fred. This was great talking to you. I hope you enjoyed it as well.
I did. Thank you very much.
And I hope you will be listening to the next episodes of our podcast.
I will, certainly. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Greiner Talks, a Greiner podcast. Subscribe now.